Hello, welcome to another GMO-free news report. This is Rachel Linden. I'm going to be your host today. I am joined by Jack Olmstead, our producer, and by a very, very special guest. We have Tamara Rubin, who is the executive director over at the Lead Safe America, and she is also the mother of four. Two of her children have acute lead poisoning. And that leads her to her next role as the director of a movie called MisLEAD. We're going to be covering the topic of lead, and I just want to say thank you and welcome to the show, Tamara.
Thank you for having me.
I know you're a busy lady because your movie's coming out soon. When can we expect MisLEAD to come out?
Well, right now we're in post-production. We've been in post-production forever. Most documentaries take sometimes 6, 7, 8, 9 years to make. We're on the 4th year mark right now. So we've been trying to get it out sooner, but it's all based on funding. It's 100% donation funded. So over 1,000 people have donated something to make the film possible, either in kind or cash support. And so we're in this final post-production phase where we got most of our footage. We're going to do 2 more shoots. It looks like we're trying to do a shoot in Flint, and we're also doing a shoot with John Fishman, the drummer of the band Fish, whose baby was poisoned, and we're going to add those into the film. We've been showing the rough cut of our film around the country for the last 2 years to generate interest and a following, and we have over 10,000 followers on the film's page on Facebook. And so that's been really helpful in terms of getting interest going. And so if we get these last bits of funding in place, we can be done with post-production and have picture lock probably in March, as soon as March. And then we'll have to do picture finishing and sound finishing and all the marketing and all that stuff to get the film actually out into the world. And so that we're hoping that it'll be out in the world no later than June.
I know a lot of people are watching the Flint water crisis and the lead poisoning there for the children, and which will be suffering for generations because lead poisoning is not a quick fix and can oftentimes end up in permanent brain damage, as I'm sure you're very painfully aware of, Tamara. How common is lead poisoning?
It's a lot more common than people think. The CDC has a report that they don't quote, that we quote in the movie, and that report shows that 1 in 3 American kids has had a blood level of 2.5 or higher in their lifetime. And the thing is, they keep quoting a different number. They quote this 535,000 children have lead poisoning, and that's 535,000 children between the ages of 1 and 5 who've had a blood level of 5 or higher in their lifetime. And so that's basically a spin on the data. They've chosen to deselect children that are under 18 but over 5. They've chosen to not include children who have a blood level 2 and up. And really, it's about 22 million American children have had unsafe levels of lead in their blood in their lifetime. The problem is that once the lead levels go down in your blood, you still have the long-term impacts, and that can be ADD, ADHD, that can be Tourette's and sensory processing disorder. It can be an autism spectrum symptom range. And there's a lot of other long-term impacts of childhood lead exposure. Obviously, the links to lead and crime have been well explored, and unfortunately, the CDC has been trying to publicize the image of this concern as being resolved or nearly resolved. Like, look at all the good we've done in the last 40 years. And yes, they've made progress, yet still, by doing that, they're dismissing all of these children who are being exposed to lead in their homes, even at the low levels. And what it's turning out, what the science is showing, is that the low-level lead exposure has a more significant impact, actually, per blood level point than the higher lead exposure proportionally. So the impact of a blood level 1, 2, 3, 4 is greater than anything over a 10, for example, proportionally. So you have a pretty significant negative health impairment with even the low levels. And then once you get above a 10 to 20, 30, you get into like different health impairments, which are seizures and death and failure of bodily functions, failure to thrive in infants, and kidney failure, heart failure, things like that.
Wow. Well, I saw the trailer to your movie online, and I think that on Vimeo is how.
Vimeo, yeah.
Okay, and we'll have a link to that. But I saw a doctor, and he had in his hand what looked like half a pinch of salt, like just a few grains.
Yeah.
And he says this is all that it takes to completely ruin a child's brain development.
That's true. You know, the thing that we talk about, a lot of advocates talk about in terms of lead dust, is that it's about microscopic dust particles. So, you know, there's a kit that a lot of the advocates show dust at different levels, and you've got how much dust can poison a town, or how much lead dust could poison a, I don't know what the different thing, a school, and then it gets down to this vial that shows how much lead dust can poison a child, and you can't see any dust in the vial. It's how much lead dust could poison a room. And so an analogy that a lot of folks use is that if you had a sugar packet of lead dust and spread it evenly across a football field, you would have a dust level that is above what is currently the recommended hazard level that's not safe for children. So a sugar packet across a football field. And you need 2 sugar packets to spread evenly across a football field to have enough dust, lead dust, to be equal to the current federal level that's considered toxic for children and dust. So there's a bunch of different levels. The federal level that children are considered at risk if this dust level is found is 40 micrograms per square foot. And years ago, the National Center for Healthy Housing had recommended that the floor dust hazard level be lowered to 10 micrograms per square foot.
Interesting. And so lead is in all kinds of things, and it was in all kinds of things. And so typically when you think of lead, you think of the outdated gasoline, at least in the United States, as being leaded. And you think of, oh, paint prior to 1978 was leaded. And I know that we had a short discussion about how it's just residential paint that they took the lead out of. And I know from selling real estate for so many years that even though they stopped making leaded paint in 1978, they still had stockpiles of it, so it was still being used and houses were being painted years after the law went into effect. So you could still have lead in your paint even though your home was constructed much later than the law went into effect. But go ahead, Tamara, why don't you tell us a little bit about where lead can be found, where it has been found, and where we can be exposed?
Well, the biggest hazard is your home. And unfortunately, people don't want to look at their home as a potential hazard because it's too confronting. So one of the things we do on the Film's Facebook page is we use an X-ray fluorescence spectrometer. This is an instrument that, this is a non-radioactive source instrument that ranges in price from $20,000 to $40,000 new. And this tests for lead in consumer goods. And we do that consumer good lead testing so that people can say, oh, look, there's lead in my cups, my dishes, in my, I don't know, toys, whatever. And then they can learn about the impact of lead. And then when they're learning about the impact of lead, once they understand it's a problem, then they can be open to seeing that lead in their home might be a problem. However, lead in the homes is a much greater problem than lead in consumer goods. But you can't just throw your house in the trash. It's too costly. And so the problem is renovation, repair, repainting, all of those things, and that's why the new RRP rule legislation went into effect to try and help protect children when a home is being renovated, but also just the dust from opening and closing an old leaded window. You know, that up and down is enough to poison a child over time, because the lead paint was actually applied with greater concentrations of lead on exterior surfaces than interior surfaces, and oftentimes the interior track of a window was painted with extra lead so that it would be extra weather resistant. Unfortunately, with those abrasive surfaces, you're creating dust, especially, you know, now those houses that were built in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, you know, it's 100 years later, and that paint was meant to last 100 years, and it's deteriorating now at new levels, even just without renovation. So the lead paint that was applied in the past is deteriorating now for the very first time, you know, at alarmingly high levels.
Lead is big business, correct? I mean, I understand that lead is added or has been added and still in some cases is added, especially in other countries, to paint in order to make things dry quicker. Am I right on with that, or is that?
I don't know.
I don't know. I mean,
you know, there's certain applications where lead paint might adhere to a surface more readily than non-lead paint, although they've developed, new technology. I mean, there's titanium dioxide-based paints, there's acrylic, there's all sorts of plastics and other types of paints that adhere probably just as well. But people are used to the properties of the lead paint in industry, and so they're going to tell you, oh yeah, it's the good stuff. It apply, it stays on better. It dries faster. I'm like, I don't know. The linseed oil and lead were the components of lead paint. So they would mix a bucket of lead dust with a bucket of linseed oil and some colorants if they were going to change the color. And there was white lead and red lead, and I don't know that it dried faster.
Gotcha. So total misnomer. I know that there are industries, big industries, that want to protect themselves, and I just wondered if that was actually accurate, or was that one of those big box, big industry tactics to keep selling their products even though they're dangerous.
What are you referring to more specifically?
Well, like, for instance, the lead industry might put out a comment that says, well, not only is it safe, it's also a necessity in industrial production for drying of paint or something like this.
They're not going to say that now. They wouldn't dare say that now. But what they're doing, what happened was, with World War I, we had munitions production. So we have this huge output of factories and employing people to create the munitions for World War I. 1914 through the 1918, the factories really geared up and were making bullets and other items using lead. And so then after World War I was over, they didn't have a source for the lead that they had this whole industry created around mining and producing items. And they'd already come up with lead and paint years before. But they said, oh, wait a second, what if we, did this on a bigger scale and made it for house paint and made it available for everyone and had a marketing campaign that, really engaged people in wanting to buy this product. And the thing about lead paint is, you can't recycle it. So you have to paint your walls, and then if you want to change the color, you just paint over it again. You can't do something with the old lead, so they didn't have to worry about it coming back into the stream as a source of lead, like the way lead batteries are recycled, and they can reuse it. So they could keep mining lead to produce new product, and that product, the perfect product, was paint. And so that's what they did, is they really pushed in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s the usage of lead paint for households, and that's why you see houses built in that era, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, have, in most cases, the highest concentration of lead in the paint.
Interesting. And would you mind telling us your personal story on how your family was affected by lead? Is that something you feel comfortable sharing?
That's how I got here. That's why, I guess the interesting thing in terms of that's how I got here is the reason I became an effective advocate is because I was willing to tell my story. And I'd like to put it out there that, any mom or dad or grandparent that can get out there and tell their story is going to help move the movement forward to educate parents and protect children, because the most compelling thing we have to use in this fight against lead is our personal stories. And so while I know a lot of people are camera shy and they don't want to, expose their family, or they may be concerned about liability, or that people will judge them because their children were poisoned, if you can get up and share your story with at least one person, two people, your community, your church, it'll make a difference. And so I started sharing my story a long time ago, and I keep sharing it. And sometimes, anyway, so I'm happy to, and I just want to encourage other people to do that. To that end, also on our website, leadsafeamerica.org, one of the things we do is we try and share family stories. So you can look up the words family stories, and there's a tag for that. And we've got dozens of family stories of what happened to them, how their children were poisoned. And unfortunately, it's the same story over and over again so very often, and it's really tragic. But I figure if we can kind of inundate, the web with this information, people will start seeing it more often. So for us, I was, let's see, it was 10 years ago. It was 2005. And we had purchased a home, and we wanted to refinance, and there was this whole, real estate boom. So we decided to repaint the exterior so that we could get a good appraisal, so that we could refinance, so we could use the money for some renovations. And we, interviewed a lot of contractors, and the first contractor we talked to said, you know what, I can't do this. This is lead paint. I'm not certified. And at the time, there wasn't an EPA RRP certification. He was talking about the state of Oregon certification, and a lot of different states have local certifications as well. And so we said, oh, okay, thanks for letting us know. And so the next few contractors we interviewed, we asked, are you trained and certified in lead-safe work practices? And we finally found a contractor who said he was trained and certified. His guys were trained and certified. He was working on like multi-million-dollar homes in the area, and our house was this little like, dinky, like the smallest house in the neighborhood. Real Estate 101, buy the smallest, ugliest house in the neighborhood. And so we had. And he told us it would be about $18,000 to repaint the exterior of our home using lead-safe work practices, and that because he was only working on the outside, that it was safe for us to stay in the home. So what we ended up doing was staying home, and I had renovated a home before. I was a bit of a real estate hobbyist. That was part of my problem. I wanted to restore the home to its architectural, original details. I was excited about, stripping down the bare wood, removing the aluminum siding, making it its 1914 glory, and that's what caused my kids poisoning in the end. Is the need to restore it. And so he used an open flame torch and melted the old lead paint off the original siding, and I decided to document the whole thing because I'd never documented one of the transformations of the house I'd worked on. I hadn't really had a digital camera before that. So I took thousands of photos. I don't know how many, but I just took all these photos. I was of every step of the way. We were outside in the yard sitting kind of far away, or we were inside and the kids were napping and I was outside taking photos. And I didn't realize that what I was doing was documenting the poisoning of my children. And what happened was the fumes from the open flame torch burning process seeped into my home. My children became instantly sick, and they were vomiting, they had diarrhea, they had headaches, their appetite changed, they were refusing to eat, they were irritable, having difficulty sleeping, and I didn't know it was lead poisoning because he told me what he was doing was safe, and I believed him. And as a consumer that knew nothing about this, I didn't know to not believe him. So I took the kids into the doctor, and they said, oh, they don't have a fever, don't worry about it, just take them home, keep them hydrated. And then for the next 2 months, while these symptoms persisted, and while the guy was working on the house too, I kept calling the doctor. I said, it's like the flu, I don't get it, they're not getting better, they're getting worse, my baby doesn't want to try solids at all, he's really irritable, he's a little bit jaundiced, what's going on? And they said, don't worry about it, just keep him hydrated. And then finally, one day, my 3-year-old woke up in a pool of feces. He was literally covered in shit from head to toe. And I said, okay, fuck this, excuse my French. I said, okay, now you need to test my kid for everything. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. It's been 2 months. So they tested AJ for everything, and he tested positive for lead. And then Avi at that point was about 8 months old, and I said, what about Avi? And they said, oh no, he's under a year old, you don't need to test him. And I'm like, but wait a second, maybe it'll give us some insight as to how AJ tested positive, because I still didn't know it was from the renovation. So I had them test Avi, and later that night we got a call from the doctor, the kids were asleep, and they said, you have to move out of your house immediately, your baby has lead poisoning. And he had a blood level of 16. Now, with a 30 to 45 day half-life theory, it was months after he'd been poisoned. So a month before he might have been a 32, and a month before that he was likely as high as a 64. I can't prove that. I just know he was a 16, which is high enough. But his symptoms were acute, and the acute poisoning is consistent with that half-life that he was likely a much higher level when he was poisoned. And, I had no idea what the journey would be that this took us on, but I was furious. And what I learned primarily is that at the time, 10 years ago now, they were only testing low-income minority families in Oregon because the CDC's demographic for who's lead poisoned is low-income minority families. This is not true. The only indicator of whether or not your child's poisoned is whether or not they live in a community that either has old schools or old homes. And those are the main factors. There's a few outliers, like if you live in a mining town or stuff, but primarily if you live in an old home built before 1978 or 1980, 81, and if you also go to an old school, your child could be poisoned. And unfortunately, the federal government is restricting this message to try and minimize it. And so whole populations of children, and what this looks like here in Portland is a little different than what it looks like elsewhere, but middle and upper income families are not getting their children tested for lead because they're being told that they don't fit the demographic for lead poisoning. And they're not being asked, hey, do you live in a house that was built before 1978? They're just not being asked. And so the screening process is broken. And anyway, it's been a long time.
Can you self-screen? Is there a urine test, or is this completely like something that has to be done at a doctor's office?
You have to do a blood lead test. The only way to determine immediate current exposure is with a blood lead test.
So no hair follicles, it's all blood.
You can do a hair test and a urine test, and you'll find lead in those things. The thing is, you won't have context for that. There's no way to. You can say, okay, I did a urine test, and then I did a detox, and then I did a urine test again, and my urine levels were different. But it has to be the exact same test. It has to be done, in the same environment, the same protocol followed for each test. And what all you'll know then is how your lead level changed from your urine. It doesn't tell you if you've had a recent exposure, because 90% of the lead that you've been exposed to is stored in your brain and your bones and your soft tissue. When you do a urine test, usually it's with a provocation chelation in the middle, and you're actually pulling the lead out of your system where it's been stored. And you and I had lead poisoning when we were kids because of lead gasoline. I don't know what our levels were, but we all had lead exposure. The thing is, now that we know what we know, and now that we know it's 100% preventable, why aren't we preventing it? Our lead exposure was from the lead gasoline fumes that were pervasive in our environment. Our lead exposure might have been because, like me, I helped my mom repaint the boat, in the summer, or I helped my mom repaint the living room, But our kids are getting lead exposure at a whole new level, given the new level of deterioration in the older housing stock that really wasn't happening, 30, 40 years ago.
And mothers can pass it on to their fetus. Am I correct in saying that?
There's new research showing that there are likely DNA impacts in terms of, and they're not exactly sure what those are right now from generation to generation, but in terms of maternal impact, Dr. Felicia Rubito is one of the scientists in our film. She works out of Tulane, and she's done research on maternal blood lead levels. And again, these are blood lead levels of not people who have considered themselves lead exposed, just like background blood lead levels of 0.4, 0.5 in that range, and what the impact of those blood lead levels is on the developing fetus. And what she showed in that study, which came out about a year ago, was an increased risk of miscarriage, inability to conceive, low birth weight babies, and other birth traumas and consideration.
Now, did you test positive? Where are you at with your lead levels?
I was last tested when I was pregnant with my youngest. He is 7, and I tested positive with a 1.0 when I was pregnant with him. And then after I gave birth, I got tested again because the baby's blood lead level is 80 to 100% of the maternal blood lead level. I just was curious, and that way I knew where he started his life. And I tested with a 1.1. Now that's above, this natural background, not natural, but the current background level. The current background level, like I said, is in that like 0.4 to 0.5 range with pregnant women. The natural background level is 0.016. So a blood lead level of 1.6 micrograms per deciliter is 100 times the natural background level of lead that one could have in their blood. And that's good to know, but at the same time, the 1.6 is kind of common for most children today. It's considered kind of the average. 100 times the natural background level is the average in children today, which is troubling, obviously. So my blood level, it was interesting because my children were poisoned, let me just think, 3 years before my youngest was born. And then I never got my blood tested because no one even suggested it. So when I got my blood lead tested, I was just doing it for curiosity's sake. I wish I had done that a long time before. I recommend that women get blood lead testing done prior to conception, and that will help them know if there's a water hazard or a paint hazard in their home. It'll set them on the path of making sure there are no hazards in their home. And for me, what ended up happening was kind of interesting. You know, Dr. Rubito's study showed all these health impairments with levels that low, right? The 0.4 to 0.5. Well, I had a 1.1. This was my 5th pregnancy, and I had, my first was a miscarriage, and which was ironically a miscarriage that happened after I'd been renovating a house. You know, this all kind of clicks together after years of, you know, analyzing things. And when my son was born, I nearly died of kidney failure because I had late-stage preeclampsia that hadn't been diagnosed, and I never had it with any of my other children. And this is the first and only child I had after my incident where my children were poisoned. So while it's completely conjecture and anecdotal evidence, it's kind of supportive of Dr. Rubito's study that there can be birth complications if the mother tests positive for lead, and my level was more than twice the level of the women in her study.
Wow.
Yeah.
Preeclampsia, that's also linked to lead, right? Like that's...
Yeah. Preeclampsia is kidney failure.
Okay, right.
And so kidney failure is one of the main pathways for lead to have an impact on the body, especially adults.
And how do you feel now? Where are your kids at now?
It's been crazy. It's been a crazy journey. You know, my whole life is about my kids, and my son Avi's been diagnosed with a brain injury and he has 130 IQ, so he's super smart. And so another problem with the system and a lot of the analysis and the economic impact reports done on blood lead levels is that they try and value it by IQ points lost, because that impacts productivity. Well, my son's IQ is 130. However, he can't read. He's just learning to read, and he's almost 11. He'll be 11 in about a week. And, you know, he has a visual memory in the 4th percentile. So, you know, if you can imagine, a really smart kid who can't read is going to get frustrated and angry a lot more often because they're trying to play Monopoly with their brothers and they can't read the cards. They're trying to play Pokemon. They're trying to play whatever. So we focus with him on auditory learning. He's got an IEP plan. He's in a special education class. Our older son, who was older at the time and yet poisoned at a lower level, also has significant impacts. He has sensory processing disorder. He gets sick all the time. He has abdominal migraines. And my 2 sons who weren't acutely poisoned don't have symptoms anywhere near what the 2 middle ones who were acutely poisoned have. So we've got our own little study group. My older son was away at summer camp at the time and wasn't poisoned, and he was about 10 years old then, and my younger son wasn't born yet. So, you know, it's kind of interesting to see the bookends and how the kids behave. Although my younger son then later did test positive, and he's got kind of a host of other issues. He's got ADD, severe, significant ADD, and he's the one who tested, you know, I was pregnant, and he tested positive both because he was tested as my blood level when I was pregnant, and then afterwards he tested with the 2.6.
So, wow. So you've come a long way. Have you found anything that does work for helping your family? Any chelation therapy or nutritional supplementation or something?
I think, you know, that's you know, I'm the executive director of a national nonprofit for childhood lead poisoning prevention, and the focus of that is childhood lead poisoning prevention. So I really want to see people not poisoned. That's my goal. However, you know, it's tricky to go into the natural chelation conversation and the diet conversation. I have some things that I disagree with that are out there that I think people need to be looking at. And the main thing is that a lot of supplements that are being given to kids that have disabilities or, you know, autism or maybe lead exposure, a lot of those supplements have lead. And if they're going to be a concentration of a supplement, like a concentration of calcium, they're also going to concentrate whatever else is naturally in the environment at the time of that concentration. So if you have bone calcium from cows or coral calcium from shells or plant-based calcium, lead biomimics calcium in the environment, and so those plants or those cows or those shells are also going to absorb lead as they absorb calcium, just as we do as humans. And I haven't found a calcium supplement that's guaranteed lead-free. So as a result, I don't give my children calcium supplements. I also know from my work that there are some plants that are high calcium that are really good at phytoremediation. phytoremediation is the ability for plants to suck lead up out of the soil. And the two best plants, or the ones that they use the most in these experiments, are sunflowers and spinach. So I try and avoid sunflower seeds. We eat them very rarely, and when we do, we eat organic, but still, organic sunflower seeds doesn't mean that they're lead-free, because organically they will absorb lead from the environment, even if there's not necessarily lead in the soil, if they're being grown near a freeway or anywhere where there used to be lead in the air. If it's not added lead from leaded pesticides, which happened, historically lead was added to pesticides. So a lot of soils that may be considered transitional or organic now historically had leaded pesticide. And so that's a consideration, that you want to make sure that farms are tested for lead if you're going to go the organic, natural, local farming route. But anyway, so we avoid spinach and we avoid sunflowers at our house, and otherwise we try and have a very healthy, natural diet for them. When my children were just poisoned, I learned that cilantro and chlorella, if they're guaranteed to be lead-free and independently tested, can help draw lead from the body, and I used a natural preparation that was, again, independently tested to be free of lead, called NDF by BioRay, and that helped my son's blood level drop really quickly. That's very controversial, because some people say, well, if you are having their blood level drop quickly, then you're actually you're pulling lead out of their system and their bones, and it's recirculating, and then you're actually potentially re-exposing their brain. So some people are very opposed to any kind of natural chelation. But given my kids had an acute exposure, I was willing to try something. And for me, it seemed to help. And on our website, we have a page. If you look up FAQ on the website, one of the first things that pops up is our natural chelation page. It talks about modified citrus pectin, which is something people have used. I've never used it. And garlic. They've done some studies about garlic being an excellent chelator. So, I think you can find dietary things to include in your diet that will help with the chelation process if that's something you're looking to explore. And I would definitely stay away from supplements if you can, especially if they have a Prop 65 label. A lot of supplements, for example, from China, or ones that you might get from an acupuncturist, have a Prop 65 warning label on it, and in many cases it's because they have lead.
Oh, they contain lead in the formulation by purpose or by accident?
By accident. By accident.
In the manufacturing.
By accident.
What are you saying? What are we looking for? The
Prop 65.
Can you tell us about that? Is that right?
It's a California Prop 65 warning label. It's for items sold in California, but because California is such an enormous state, when people are importing things, they put the Prop 65 label on regardless of what state they're going to, because if they do it for everything, then they get California covered. So if you've got a Prop 65 warning label, in most cases, it's a little label at the bottom of the package that says, warning, this may contain lead, or warning, this does contain lead. One really popular one is Earth Paste toothpaste is natural and has a warning saying that it has a Prop 65 warning on the bottom that says, in fact, that it does contain lead. And so, there's, I don't know why anyone would use a toothpaste that contains lead, but it's not regulated as a food item, so they're allowed to sell it as a natural health item, and because it's lead that's naturally occurring in the clay that they use to make the toothpaste, they're getting away with saying that it has beneficial properties when in fact it contains lead. So
I love Mike Adams at Natural News. He's got a website. He sells product. He did some heavy metal testing on all kinds of supplements and green powders that people take for health, and he just threw down and raised the bar for supplements. Because of his work and his testing, he outed a bunch of companies that had products that were high in heavy metals. And so if you're watching this and you're curious and you're wanting some really great quality products, he's another good resource to turn to. Mike Adams, Natural News, has done a lot of research into the better products, and I know he has a product line, several supplement product lines that are tested for heavy metals. And good guy, good stuff. Any brands that you really like that you want to do a shout out to?
I try and stay unaffiliated from any kind of branding because I think it waters down the message. But people always ask me, Well, first off, 3M is a sponsor, and we give away free lead paint test kits. Oops, there we go. I'm trying to get it on the screen. I'm backwards here. These sell for between $10 and $15 in the store. They have 2 test swabs in them, and we give them away for free because 3M donates them to us.
And those are 3M to test your house, right? To swab your walls or your toys?
Yeah, they have a liquid and a powder, and you crush it, and another liquid comes out, and you can use it to test paint. They will work on some dishes, but they won't work on most dishes. And so anyway, we give them away for free to test, for people to test. And then
that's crazy. Dishes? Like human food eating dishes have lead in them?
Pretty much, yeah, if you go to my website and you look at, let's see, okay, I don't know how am I going to do this. I got to do a screen share. Hold on one second.
Yeah, so I know that was a thing like back in the, 1800s, 1600s, where we had, people were getting poisoned from lead in crockery and on dishes. Didn't they say Andy Warhol had lead poisoning?
I don't know. Hold on one second. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen right now?
Parts of it, yes. Wow, got a serious screen share going on there.
I don't know what's happening. It's going into in perpetuity.
Wow, you have the ultimate. You have the serious screen share. And that's the website that you're showing us, right?
So this is my website. If you go on my website, you can look up. Here's a tag for pottery, and you can look on pottery.
Okay.
And then these are all pottery things that I've tested that were positive for lead. You know, decorative cheese bowl, 71,000 parts per million. A dollar store bowl was lead-free. Bunnykin set, which apparently a lot of people have, was 73,800 parts per million lead. I've done a lot of testing, and if you look on the tags, you can see other things. So if you want to look up lead-free things or ceramic things, or you want to look at coffee mugs, you can click on the coffee mug link, and here we've got bunches of coffee mugs. Some have lead, some don't.
And your website again to redirect people?
It's leadsafeamerica.org.
Okay, so at leadsafeamerica.org, do you cover things like baby formula, or are you finding lead in things that...
Did I just turn off my screen share? I'm going to do that. It was
you did. Now I see your face.
Okay. I don't. See, the thing is, food and water, as you know, from Flint, are toxic in parts per billion. Supplements, anything you ingest is toxic in parts per billion. What I use is this X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, and that measures lead in parts per million. So I can't test for food toxicity, although, like, for example, with the earth paste, when I tested that toothpaste, it registered at between 11 and 15 parts per million when it's toxic in parts per billion as something you ingest. So it's definitely a concern, but most food items are needing to be tested in a lab because you can't measure it with like an in-office tool because it's such a trace amount that's toxic for children.
Okay, so the testing that you've been doing is mostly with your handheld instruments.
Yeah, and lead check swabs.
Okay.
And I have a company that's a sponsor of ours. They're really generous, and we love them. They also, you can buy these test kits. They have, they're called certifiedkit.com, and they're on our website pages. Like I said, I don't really promote products, but they have products for testing for asbestos and testing for lead and testing your water, and they have all sorts of great products that are do-it-yourself, where they send you a kit with instructions, you send them a sample, the lab does the testing, and they email you the results. The other thing you can do is you can get a lead hazard assessment of your home, and that can include water testing. Doesn't always. Sometimes you have to ask for water testing separately. But on these kits that we give away, we have our little simple solutions list here, and that shows what we recommend. So just as a start, one is get a professional hazard assessment of your pre-1980 home. Consider replacing any lead-painted original windows, doors, and trim. Find out if your child's school or daycare has been tested, which is something a lot of people overlook. Move children out of the home if you're going to do any renovations. Always hire certified contractors. Follow up renovations with a clearance test. And report violations to the EPA or OSHA. And then a simple thing that a lot of people can do is take their shoes off. I mean, none of that it's all kind of...
Take their shoes off, like when they come into their home, like remove your shoes.
Yeah, take your shoes off outside because otherwise you're pulling stuff in. I am bringing it back around to Flint. You want to, filters. It's a problem. It's not good enough. You need to replace those water delivery systems. Oh, I was talking to you about this earlier. I don't think we went over this, but what I was saying was, thanks to the Bush administration, there was a law passed at that time, the Bush Jr., that said that fittings, fixtures, and water delivery systems that contained up to 8% lead were allowed to be labeled as lead-free. So you've got new faucets in new homes or new faucets installed in schools that have really high lead levels because under the Bush administration they were marked as lead-free even though they have up to 8% lead, and that's nuts. And so the legislation just shifted this year. And so now the best legislation has been in California and Vermont, and they have the total lead content has to be below a certain amount, but also it has to not leach lead into the water, which is a no-brainer. And so new faucets bought now in 2016 should actually be lead-free or at least lead-safe and comply with the new standards. So that's good, and it's a good year to replace your faucets. You also need to know that every step of the way, every component is adding the lead to the water. So it's the pipes, it's the delivery system, it's the fittings, it's the faucets and fixtures, it's also the water meter. Anywhere the water flows through, it's going to, unfortunately, draw lead depending on the corrosivity. And the other thing that we have a blog post about on our site is chloramine and fluoride. If you add chloramine to a system, it has a function, but then if you add fluoride to that water delivery system, which luckily we don't have here in Portland, then the combined action chemically of the chloramine and the fluoride increase corrosivity on the water delivery system, and the lead levels in the water increase by 900% or more.
What? So, one more reason not to have fluoridated water and to filter your water. But you're right, though. It's not.
You know what? It's actually, I gotta correct you. It's the only reason not to have fluoridated water. Forget about all the other arguments, because it's like people are arguing those arguments to the end of the world, and it's not making a difference. If you tell them you can't have fluoridated water because you'll be lead poisoning children and causing brain damage, I think the argument ends there. But people just still don't know that fact. Yeah,
no, I mean it's a failed public policy that is being defended by complete myth and misinformation, and put out there by our own public officials and our own public policy to defend the tailings and the waste from the ammunition manufacturing.
Yeah.
I mean, bombs. I mean, this is just garbage that they can't find places to put, so just put it in the water. And it has secondary impacts on humans. I mean, of course, the adverse health effects, but it also has psychological and neurological sedative properties. I mean, it's dumbing us down and keeping us, like, numb. And it was used by Nazi Germany to keep the prisoners from having any strength and rioting, and dumbing them down mentally to a place where they were they were like cattle. It's sad, but it's a tool. And I'd hate to think that anybody in our administration would want to push these things, but it's bizarre to me that it's still defended, especially in light of lead poisoning. Like that now, like I did not know that. I am like seriously PO'd. If you could see inside my head, you would see flames erupting as I am excessively pissed off now. And like this in itself, Jack, deserves its own friggin' rant because I've just gotten like crazy angry just then. You're absolutely right in saying now, really, that's maybe the single best reason why fluoride should never be in our drinking water.
Right.
I'm outraged because this isn't an isolated issue for just Portland's water supply or infrastructure, or Flint, or D.C., which had to deal with the lead water scandal. This is all over the United States. We don't have the luxury of a government who is taking care of business by upgrading our water infrastructure. Well, I know in other countries this is an important thing, right? But here, for some reason, we're dropping the ball.
Yeah, I just posted on my blog yesterday because I found out my son came home with his water bottle full of water. I'm like, what? How could your water bottle be full? You didn't drink any water all day? He's like, no, the gym teacher made me drink from the sink in the gym. So I'm like, fuck that. So I went, I swear a lot, sorry. But I went and posted the lead levels in my son's school. The testing was done in 2001. Okay, it's old testing. It's 15 years old. However, nothing was done except minimal filtration, and lead levels in the water delivery system at my son's elementary school were as high as 93 parts per billion. And there's no reason that if I'm sending my son to school with filtered water clean from home, that he should be drinking out of the sink. And the gym teacher didn't let him go get his water bottle, and we've already got, you know, stuff in place, especially since my kids have IEP plans and 504s, and they have a history of lead exposure, so doubly they shouldn't be drinking from the sink. And they know that they're not supposed to drink from the water fountain, so I CC'd an email to the school attorney, and I posted it on my blog. And, you know, some people are like, well, that was back in 2001. I'm like, but the thing is, that testing was done in 2001, and the only reason you're not outraged about it today is because it was 15 years ago, because nothing really has been done. And what I noticed when I was going around with my son for, you know, he was in music classes, and so he had to go to all the different schools to do performances and stuff, and I would go sit in the hall while he was doing his performances with his baby brother, and I was sitting on the floor, you know, in the hallways of these different schools, and I noticed that I was at eye level with the water filtration units that were underneath the fountains in the hall, and I started noticing that none of them had been replaced. They all had replacement dates. And next, it said, like, you know, next replacement should be this date, and that date was like 3 years ago. And I took photos and I submitted those, and when I wrote a law for the state of Oregon asking that we make sure that schools and child care centers are lead-free, and I submitted that with my testimony showing that there's evidence that even though there's a filtration system put in place and we found lead, nothing's being done about it, it's not being maintained properly. If there's no third-party oversight of a problem like that, then the district is, you know, not going to pay attention and not going to change filters at appropriate intervals. And then getting to the deal with the families in Flint, there's no way families in Flint are going to change those filters at appropriate intervals to protect themselves. Are they going to keep giving out filters every 3 months? I don't think so. You know, in perpetuity. I mean, they've really the corrosivity that has been that has released lead into their water system. That's not going to stop now that they've switched the water system back.
No, and they were finding that one filter wasn't enough, that you'd have to do two, and the average filter from like a Brita thing, no, they needed like military industrial strength filters back to back in order to just drink the water or use the water. So my heart goes out to the people of Flint. You've got a long-term issue. It can happen anywhere. This is not a poor people's problem, although sadly I think that the solutions are slower to come to those that are socioeconomically challenged. But this is a problem all across the United States. And I don't know why our EPA isn't jumping all over this. And why do we have elaborate plans for all kinds of new construction and buildings and all of this, and new freeways and new things, but we don't have any upgrade to the already existing structures that are vitally important, like our water supply, especially for our children.
And that's why I made the film. The reason we don't have it is because we don't have national outrage that this is everybody's problem. So we've created this film so people can see that it's everybody's problem, and by seeing that it's everybody's problem, hopefully we'll generate the national outrage among voters across the country to actually inspire people to start national initiatives to protect families from lead from any source. And, you know, again, going back to what I said earlier, the focus has been on low-income minority families. The minute any reporter says, well, this is a primarily black problem in Flint, Michigan, where, you know, it's like the minute they do that, they marginalize the problem, not because it's because societal beliefs and racism are so ingrained in our perception of social justice issues that it's easy to deflect and say, well, that's not my problem. I don't live in Flint. I'm not poor. I'm not a minority, so this isn't my problem. And that's the problem with the coverage on this. I mean, they really need to get that this is everyone's problem.
Exactly. And it's an ongoing issue, and it's not a quick fix. And unless we light a fire at the very top, I don't see this changing on a national level. You know what? Listen, I I am not a big supporter of the industrial military complex. I get that somehow that's the thing that drives our country. But listen, by what do they say? By 2026, they think 1 in 2 children is going to have autism. I mean, and it's a soup, a chemical cocktail soup coming at our kids through the air, through the water, through every possible way. And if we don't clean up what our children are being exposed to, if we don't give them better, who's going to fight your friggin' wars? Who's going to lift a gun up? Who's going to fly a plane, if that's important, which I don't think it is. To be quite frank with you, I think if we put more attention on our food, water, air, children, on our earth, and the things that are important to a mom, and we have maybe, I don't know, a mom or somebody who cared about kids in the office at the very top, and we paid less attention to the latest jet plane and paid more attention to the latest water coming out of our children's taps, that would raise stronger, healthier children and be the absolute best thing for the security of our country and the perpetuity of freedom or whatever else we're going to call it. We just need to invest in the health of our kids and invest in the health of America, thinking of it from a piece of this earth that is valuable. If you poison your earth, you poison your country, you have nothing left. Your children can't fight your wars. They can't protect your borders. They can't, you know, protect your war on drugs or cancer or was it Muslims? I can't count anymore. You know, they can't do those things that we value as a society if they're not fully functional. We got to give our kids a fighting chance. And I love what you're doing, Tamara. I love, love, love Let's Safe America. I love the fact that you got a movie coming out. But you need like $70,000 to finish that movie, right?
Yeah, we had a fundraiser which was really exciting with the potential to raise all the finishing funds. It was we had a John Fishman of the band Fish contacted me about a year ago. He and his wife contacted me. Their baby was poisoned. Again, an example of it can be anybody. He's a wealthy man, very popular among his followers, has millions of fans, and he contacted me because they were looking for help and so they offered to help. They wanted to see how they could help us in return, and so we had a raffle for some fish tickets to Mexico, and we had the potential to actually make the full $140,000 we needed to finish the film at the time, but instead we made about $68,000 in raffle ticket sales, which was amazing, and actually got us started back working on the film. Our editor is back in the office, and now we're doing some shooting next week, and we're ready to wrap things up, but we still need the money for animation. And because some of the points need to be animated, just not like necessarily cartoons, but the film animation, and some final editing, picture finishing, sound finishing, and getting the final cut printed once we're done. And then we're gonna try and do an Oscar qualifying run, not with the intention of earning an Oscar, but with the intention of getting the attention of Hollywood, because with an Oscar qualifying run, if you do all of the steps you need, which is a 1-week run in New York and a 1-week run in LA and a few other things, then you send in copies, and like 200 members of the Academy of Motion Pictures need to watch your film, and that's a whole new audience for the issue. So that's what we're hoping to bring attention to.
Nice. Well, let me know when you hit the East Coast. I would love to come and see you in New York. Let's do the premiere.
Yeah. Sure.
National Press Club, let me know. If you want to do an education event for the press, we can arrange to help you with that as well. So Tamara, great. So people that want to donate, reach you, leadsafeamerica.org. That's the best place to reach you?
Yep.
Brilliant, brilliant. One last thing I wanted to ask you about that we didn't quite get to touch on, and I know this from real estate, so it's my last leaving question. I know that people associate lead with paint inside of a home and now, of course, dishes, but I understood that those like 1950s tiles that everybody loves and they don't want to touch, but then sometimes maybe they've got to remodel and knock them out, those are supposed to be super laced with lead.
Those end up being like 200, 300,000 parts per million lead often. However, there's no tile regulation, so you can buy new tiles today that also have that amount of lead.
So yeah, just got to be really careful. What about drywall dust, that kind of thing?
Usually not lead in drywall dust, usually. And only sometimes, like I'd say, well, I don't know percentages, but I'd guess in my experience about 30 to 40% of the time there can be actually lead in lath and plaster. But usually it's just in the paint or the coating, depending on the year constructed.
Okay, so watch out. Those are some big pitfalls. Any other last bit information you want to leave with our guests?
Well, I always say test your kids, test your home, and make sure your children's school has been tested. On top of that, ask grandma to test her house too. And,
Right.
you know, you got to protect those babies.
Exactly. And you're going to be heading to Flint to do some water testing, maybe?
Not water testing. I'm going to do blood testing. I've got a sponsor that has offered to help me test 200 people in Flint at a community event. So we're trying to coordinate that right now. We have a few other pieces to line up, but yeah.
And those few other pieces, you need a building, you need some nurses. What do you need?
Yeah. So we're trying to find a public location like a community center where we can also film it. And we need either CLIA-waived certified medical practitioners or nurses or doctors that can help run the blood testing machines. And we've got that. Machines are donated. The vials are donated for 200 people. And then, you know, I'm always looking for production assistance help. You know, like I said, a lot of the help on the film has been donated, and some of the camera work's been donated, and some of the sound work's been donated. So if there's any way that someone is inclined to help us with some of the shooting costs, that's great. Whatever we can pull together. We're assembling a little team right now. We've had about 7 different cameramen on the film, depending on the timing. So, you know, one just, you know, fun thing, you know, the goal has been to make this a big deal, and we've been trying, like, what can we do to draw attention? And you know, like I said, John Fishman's supporting the project. He's the drummer of the band Fish. But I reached out to Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend, and they're donating music to the film. The Who, you know, is donating Behind Blue Eyes to the film. And, you know, we have a lot of other supporters that are helping in subtle, fun ways. And it's just been really wonderful to have this be a collaborative community event that, you know, people really want to see this message get out there and children be protected.
Okay, so, and that is MisLEAD, America's Secret Epidemic?
Yep, and the website's misleadmovie.com. Right now, it's not fully up. We had a little website glitch this week, so we're trying to restore it. But you can watch the trailer to the film by clicking through the Vimeo link on the homepage of leadsafeamerica.org, or you can look up Tamara Rubin on Vimeo, and there is a link there as well. Or you can go to our Facebook page for the film, which is where we post a lot of the dishes and stuff that we test that are positive, and that's facebook.com/MisLEAD movie, and that's MISLEAD, so spelled like mislead, MisLEAD movie.
MisLEAD movie. Well, thank you for all your hard work, Tamara. Please keep up the hard work. We'll look for your movie April time frame, possibly, and fingers crossed. And we'll look for you. We'll look for your website, your Facebook page. I just want to say thank you for all your hard work. Please keep it up. I know this is a very, very important issue touching almost all of us, and every economic status and every race and religion, and not just here in America but across the world, but most definitely here in America. So thank you so much for all your hard work. And for our viewers out there, please join us next week. We've got some great shows. We're not dropping Flint. We're sticking with Flint. We're in it for the long haul, so we appreciate your viewing, and check us out next Friday. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.